Hello, today is Monday, October 7th, and welcome to episode 369 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Lester Munson, and I'm joined by NSI's Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller and my fellow Senior Fellow Morgan Vigna. This morning, today, we're going to talk about a situation in the South China Sea that happened last week. Chinese Coast Guard forces attacked Vietnamese fishermen near the Paracel Islands. The Paracel Islands are located within the phantasmal 9-dash line, which is the international border through the South China Sea that China asserts defines its interests in the region. No one else recognizes the 9-dash line. The Paracel Islands themselves are disputed between Vietnam, China, and Taiwan. Notably, 50 years ago, China and Vietnam fought a brief war over them. China is now occupying the Paracel Islands, but these Vietnamese fisher people were fishing in international waters off of the islands. They were attacked by Chinese Coast Guard forces. Vietnam has protested this action. The fisher people, by the way, the fishermen are all safe back in Vietnam, in case you were wondering. Also, notably last week, the Philippines came out and said, we are also concerned about the way China is acting in this regard, essentially taking the side of Vietnam. The U.S. has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, has increasing ties to Vietnam. A lot of people think of Vietnam as being defined by the Vietnam War 50 years ago. It's really not the case anymore. The U.S. and Vietnam are actually getting closer and closer. Other items of note about this incident: the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and Japan are engaged in joint naval and military exercises in the region last week in Philippines waters. And also, there was an interesting story in the Washington Post about communications cables under the sea. The ones that go through the South China Sea, companies that own them and have to maintain them are increasingly concerned about actions China might take that threaten their people or their economic interests. And so the U.S. is actually urging some of these companies to run their cables outside of the South China Sea zone. So we're starting to see China's aggression have an impact in the economic sphere as well. Martha, I want to go to you first here. What are your thoughts about what's happening in the South China Sea, the events of last week, and how this impacts the U.S. role in the region?
So this is, first and foremost, China is acting outside of international norms. This 9-dash line is bogus, to put it in technical terms. In 2016, this was deemed as, not China's waters by international law. And yet they have become more and more aggressive, and particularly the way they went about this with these poor Vietnamese fishermen who, suffered from China's ambitions, that are imperialist ambitions. And so, I think a couple things come to mind to me, which is, first of all, this can affect trade because $5 trillion worth of trade flows through this water. And not only that, but the undersea cables carry about 99% of the world's which can affect financial transactions. And, for some people, this would really affect their Facebook scrolling. But on a more serious level, this doesn't just threaten distant shores. This actually is a backbone for our digital communications and also for trade, which has, both of which have potential for significant implications for the average U.S. citizen.
Morgan, should we be looking for the UN to play a role here in defending open trade on the globe's waterways, or is there something else we should be trying to do here to remedy the situation?
Les, didn't I just tell you that you shouldn't ask stupid questions if you don't want stupid answers?
Fair.
Yeah, no, in all seriousness, I'm not going to answer that question. I don't think there's a role for the UN to play. I mean, clearly the UN can't, solve some of the, most intractable challenges out there, including the Middle East and Ukraine. So why should we expect them to deal with Chinese aggression with, if anything, they are cuddling up to Xi and to Beijing. So putting that aside, I don't think you're going to find much of a fault line here between me and Martha. Look, Chinese aggression in the region is not new. The Philippines in particular have suffered the brunt of that as of late. As you note, the 9-line is, not a thing. There's no basis in international law for it. And as a matter of fact, China is flouting international law, maritime law, in taking aggressive action towards these fishermen. I mean, not only are you beating them up, but you're seizing their catch. Like, what is China thinking here? This is just blatant and just so unnecessary of the Chinese authorities to do so. I think what is notable is that you are seeing military exercises conducted jointly by the United States, New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines, and others. I think, and this is new, and I think that should be applauded. President Biden did go to Vietnam last year. And I think we are starting to see a softening of that relationship, particularly the mill relationship. We are looking to looking at a number of arms sales to Vietnam. I think that is a good thing. At the same time, though, I think we need to be taking a closer look at what we can do to position ourselves in the region. The United States is a Pacific country. It is our business. What happens in the South China Sea, despite China's saying that there is no reason for us to be involved. So I think we should be looking at more opportunities here to bolster those alliances and partnerships in the region in the face of Chinese aggression.
One of the things China has said, as you alluded, Morgan, is that the U.S. should mind its own business. This is an Asian matter. It's totally disagree with that statement. The issue is not about Asia. The issue is about free passage in international waterways for people who want to engage in trade. And China is obviously now interfering with that on fishing directly, indirectly with these undersea cables. Who knows where it's going to go next? So the U.S. has a national interest, and as do many other nations, in free commerce and free navigation in that area. But another issue here, we talked about the possibility of an Asian NATO a week or two ago. And maybe things are moving to something like that, kind of a network of alliances. But the thing that is driving that is this behavior from China that is pushing its neighbors away from China and towards each other. We're seeing Vietnam and the Philippines, which don't have exactly the same interests, let's face it, into each other's arms, pushing them towards the United States, pushing them towards Australia and these other countries. So this is a direct effect of the way China's behaving. And one does kind of wonder, will there be a pivot in Chinese behavior in the near future as their economy continues to struggle? They're trying to get back to high growth and a lot of job creation. They're really struggling with that. These belligerent actions towards their neighbors, which seem to have no real economic purpose, are really working against their interests there. So will we see a change here? Okay. That's a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, October 9th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. Fault Lines is on YouTube. Please check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.